Hi, I'm Natasha Oakley, a Senior Health and Safety Consultant here at Napthens Health and Safety. Thanks for joining us on this month's podcast. For this month's health and safety discussion, we'll be focusing on Legionella risks and the control of Legionella in water systems within care homes. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Craig Ward, a Legionnaire and water treatment specialist, who'll be talking us through some of the important things to consider when we're thinking about managing Legionella risks within healthcare premises. So before we start, I'd just like to extend a warm welcome to Craig. Hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. And I was hoping we could kick things off by way of a quick introduction to yourself and what you do.
Yeah, thank you. My name's Craig Ward. I'm a Senior Legionella Consultant for an organisation called Total Environmental Compliance, and we specialise in control measures and minimising the risk of Legionnaires disease within water systems of various types.
Okay, great. So I thought probably it'd be useful to kick off today's session to kind of go right back to basics, really, so that we can understand why Legionella management is so important. Greg, can you explain briefly what Legionnaires disease is and how this is caused?
Yeah, it's a common question. I mean, Legionella bacteria or Legionnaires disease is caused by Legionella bacteria. Legionellosis is a collective term for the disease caused by Legionella bacteria. Ultimately, Legionnaires disease is a potentially fatal form of pneumonia, and everyone is at risk. So there's a misconception with Legionella that it targets the vulnerable, the elderly, but historical cases have proved that everybody is at risk of Legionnaires disease. There is increased risk, which we're going to talk about later on, but the Legionella pathogen, Legionella bacteria, which causes Legionnaires disease, is a waterborne pathogen. It's a natural occurring bacteria that survives within our rivers, within our lakes, and also within our drinking water. So our main wholesome drinking water, which is provided by the large utility companies, can contain low levels of the Legionella bacteria within the system. And at very low levels, it's deemed a minimal risk, and in theory, it will go through the system and in contact with people, a person, and not cause us any harm. It's only where we engineer that risk and we increase the risk levels through building systems, water systems, whether that be leisure or practical systems for general housekeeping, etc., etc. That's where Legionella has the conditions to grow and become a problem.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier about kind of vulnerable persons, and so I was just wondering really why Legionella control is particularly important in kind of a care home setting or healthcare settings.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we're all at risk of Legionnaires disease. However, some of the key significant factors in increasing our risk of contracting Legionnaires disease and it causing serious illness is typically our age and health of an individual. And of course, within the care home setting, we have an increased age group, and also typically with age becomes various ailments and illnesses which affect our general health and also our immune systems, which makes us more susceptible. So as a collective, the care home sector is deemed a high risk sector when it comes to susceptibility to Legionnaires disease.
Okay. Okay, and so with it being a high risk sector, is there any kind of specific legal requirements that care homes should be aware of?
Yes, we've had an increase. I mean, over recent years and decades within the UK, the United Kingdom have a very stringent guidance and legislative documents and procedures that we need to adhere to control and minimise the risk of Legionnaires disease. One thing that we'd like to point across is that it's very, very difficult to eradicate the risk of Legionnaires, of people contracting Legionnaires disease. We can by following the Health and Safety Executive's guidance and the directives by organisations like the Legionella Consultant Association, which is our sort of code of conduct within our industry. We can reduce the risk significantly. So industry standards, service delivery, all guided by, as I mentioned, the LCA, the Legionella Control Association, and there's a clear code of conduct and best industry practice that we need to follow. The documents L8 and HSG 274 are the guidance and legislative documents that the HSE encourages to follow and adhere to, and thus minimising the risk to building users and residents in the care home sector as practically as we can. As most, we're very keen to reduce that risk without impacting on the water systems that we use, but it's all governed under these two documents that really detail finally the point on a point-by-point basis of what procedures and control measures need to be implemented to reduce the risk as much as we can.
So any kind of organisation that wants to find out a little bit more about the requirements and what they need to do should probably head over to the HSE's Legionella section, and you'll be able to find that the ACOPs and the guidance there. Yeah,
within the HSE website, these documents are available freely to view and to print off, and hard copies can actually be ordered off that site as well. Historically, there was a confusion over what is guidance, what is legislation. The latest documents, which is HSG 274, is now being split into parts 1, parts 2 and part 3, covering industrial water systems, domestic water systems, which will be applicable to the care home sector, and then other risk systems, which are typically like vehicle washes, machinery, etc., that are deemed high risk. So they're all available to view online and are very clear and precise of what the requirements are for any organisation, including those within the care sector.
Okay, great. Would you be able to run us through kind of what the legislation means in practical terms for care home operators or people in the care sector, and give us a bit of an idea as to what people should be doing in these environments to minimise their kind of Legionella risk?
Yeah, I mean, practical terms. One is to have a clear understanding of the mandatory and the risks that are being created by the water systems within the care sector. Secondly, is off the back of that risk, is also understanding what the control measures are required to control that risk and reduce it significantly down to what's deemed acceptable. Ultimately, as we said, we can't prevent Legionella growth, but we can minimise it, and where we can stop the proliferation of Legionella, i.e. having system conditions that allow bacteria to grow to what is deemed out of control. So we would recommend that the care home providers should be ensuring compliance and following the HSE's guidance documents and legislative documents L8 and HSG 274, and also showing a clear understanding of their responsibility for Legionella and water compliance. So in practical terms, is understanding what they should be doing, implementing it and managing that risk throughout. For somebody to have that, they need to have a clear understanding of the requirements of Legionella and have the relevant training and competence to carry that through, whether that be themselves or whether they're using a specialist service provider or a combination of both.
Okay, great. So in terms of kind of that level of competence then, is there kind of levels to what care home operators can do themselves, or would you always kind of suggest that consultation with a specialist is required?
Yeah, ultimately, the HSE are very clear within their Legionella guidance documents L8 and HSG 274 that there's a big emphasis on competence, training. So ultimately, assessing the risk and understanding the risk to building and building users is typically done by a specialist service provider. However, it's clear within the guidance and legislation, the document is they can self-deliver that if they feel they've got somebody competent enough and with the right training and experience to be able to assess the risk within their portfolio on their water systems. So managing the risk requires an appointed responsible person that's deemed suitably qualified, competent to manage the risks that have been identified. We've worked within the industry with organisations where we've acted in consultancy role and worked with them to self-deliver Legionella control. We've also done a total comprehensive package where we take full responsibility for the delivery. However, it's clear that the client, the responsible person within the care sector, for instance, within an organisation, still has accountability for the delivery of the contract through a service provider to ensure that we're carrying out in the correct manner. So there is options where we've worked with organisations to train their staff to deliver some of the more routine low skill level tasks of temperature monitoring, flushing of low use outlets, for instance, which has dramatically reduced the cost and the spend, but also not compromising the compliance element of Legionella control and the service delivery.
So that awareness and competence of key members of the team is of utmost importance.
It is, yes, because failure to use a competent person to deliver it leaves the organisation and individuals now open to prosecution. So the organisations themselves are leaving themselves open to large fines, and individuals now, worst case scenario, in the event of that HSE being able to prove poor competence, poor training, etc., then in the event of a fatality, then it's individuals within that organisation are leaving themselves open to corporate manslaughter charges or potential corporate manslaughter charges.
Okay, great. So we've come to the end of our chat today. I think we've touched on some, important parts of Legionella risk management and things for organisations to consider. But I was just wondering before we leave whether you could give us kind of 3 key important take-home messages.
Yeah, I think it's important to, one, is for any organisation to really understand the risk of their buildings to both the building users and the occupants in the care sector. Without that understanding of the risk, whether that be via a risk assessment, then we really haven't got the foundations for any sort of competent control measures in place. We then go on to the control measures. So once we understand what the risks are, is ensuring organisations building then control measures, whether it's through a combination of self-delivery or a specialist service provider. And also 3 is clear lines of communication. It's nearly all Legionella outbreaks have come back to a breakdown in communication, whether that's internally or with their service provider or a mixture of both. So for me, the 3 things are that: 1, understanding the risks; 2, the implementation of the control measures; and 3, clear lines of communication.
Wonderful, that's great. So thanks for your time today. And if anybody needs any further information from you, they can get in touch with you via your website, I assume, and Total Environmental Compliance.
That is correct.
Is that right? Yeah, great. Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.